But in the midst of all that ongoing and breaking news today and into tonight, a political and international bombshell dropped tonight, thanks apparently to a band of Russian hackers. The Washington Post had the first part of this story yesterday morning, and it was intriguing enough then. The Washington Post yesterday, quote, "The Russian government hackers penetrated the computer network of the Democratic National Committee. The intruders so thoroughly compromised the DNC system that they were able to read all email and chat traffic. Some of the hackers had access to the DNC's network for about a year. A security group at the DNC apparently called in to deal with the hack, decided that there were two different Russian hacker groups that accessed the DNC's computer network. The first one they called Cozy Bear. Cozy Bear apparently gained access to the DNC's computers last summer, and they were somehow monitoring, capturing email traffic and messaging traffic inside the DNC. So Cozy Bear was one group. The second group they decided to call Fancy Bear. I don't know. The cybersecurity is weird. But the security firm believes that the group Fancy Bear works for the GRU, which is the Russian military intelligence service. And that hacker group reportedly broke into the Democratic Party's network recently. They broke in late April and specifically targeted the DNC's opposition research files on Donald Trump. Late April. So when Donald Trump was locking up the Republican nomination in April, when he was winning New York and then Connecticut and then Delaware and Maryland and Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, when he was putting the Republican presidential nomination out of reach for any of his competitors, Russia's military intelligence service apparently decided at that time that they would break in to the Democratic Party servers and check in on what the Democratic Party had in its files on this guy, Donald Trump, who was apparently going to be the Republican nominee for president. This is interesting, right? I mean, whether or not you watch The Americans, the idea of the Russian government sending spies to steal that kind of stuff in America, that is intriguing, cloak and dagger, binge watch it kind of stuff. I mean, we do know that this is not the first time stuff like this has happened. In the 2008 presidential campaign, it was hackers backed by the Chinese government who broke into computers from the John McCain campaign. They also apparently broke into computers from the Barack Obama presidential campaign in 2008. There were reports in 2012 that Chinese government hackers tried again with the Romney and Obama campaigns in 2012. And, on the one hand, it's a little scary that foreign governments like China and Russia are able to do this, right? Think about the consequences of this. If they're able, through this kind of hacking, to obtain some truly damning and truly secret information about a candidate by breaking into computer files this way, then presumably if that candidate ended up becoming president, the Chinese government or the Russian government could then be in a position to use that information against the American government. I mean, conceivably, they could use it to try to blackmail the sitting U.S. president. That is scary. Also, on the other hand, it's a little flattering to know how interested these other countries are in our elections. If the American public cared half as much about our elections as the Russians and the Chinese apparently do, we would probably triple our voter turnout in this country. So, I mean, in terms of trying to get this in perspective, we do know that this has happened before. We know that the campaigns, at least, if not the parties, have been targeted by foreign hackers sponsored by foreign governments in previous presidential elections. What is different here and now is that we know from the Washington Post reporting that apparently what they were after inside the Democratic Party was the Democratic Party's opposition research on Donald Trump. That's what they were after. And the other thing that is different this year is that right now we are in the Donald Trump era of Republican politics. And that makes a story like this even stranger and spookier this year than if it involved normal American politicians in some normal American political year. Because these hackers that broke into the Democratic Party servers, they're Russian government hackers. At least according to the security firm that the DNC hired to protect it when they realized this breach had happened, they believe these hackers were dispatched by the Russian government, by Vladimir Putin. And this year, Vladimir Putin has a very strange role to play in Republican politics because Donald Trump is the presidential nominee of the Republican Party, and Donald Trump has some strange ideas about Vladimir Putin.
Putin. He said Donald Trump is a genius, and he's the real leader over in that country. And these people that I'm negotiating with all the time, these people on the stage with me, they said, you should disavow what Putin of Russia said. I said, I'm not disavowing that he called me a genius. Are you crazy? Don't worry, I can't be seduced. He called me a genius. He said Donald Trump is a genius and he's going to be the leader of the party and he's going to be the leader of the world or something. He said some good stuff about me, and these characters that I'm running against said, we want you to disavow that statement. I said, what, he called me a genius? I'm going to disavow it? Are you crazy? Do you believe it? How stupid are they? We want you to disavow the statement. I'm not going to disavow. And besides that, wouldn't it be good if we actually got along with countries? Wouldn't it be actually a positive thing, right? Do we have to always fight? I think I'd have a good relationship with Putin. Well, actually, Putin did call me a genius, and he said I'm the future of the Republican Party. So he's off to a good start. I will say he's off to a good start, right, folks? And by the way, I'm not a friend of Putin. I don't know Putin. I've never met Putin. I respect Putin. He's a strong leader, I can tell you that. Unlike what we have a pathetic leader. Pathetic. Then Putin said, Donald Trump is a genius. He's going to be the next great leader of the United States. No, think of it. So they wanted me to disavow what he said. How dare you call me a genius? How dare you call me a genius, Vladimir? Never say a thing. Wouldn't it be nice if we actually got along with Russia? Wouldn't that be good? I mean, is that a bad thing?
I know what you call it when a person never forgets an insult, right? Somebody never forgets a slight. You know, you say that's a person who holds a grudge, right? What do you call it when somebody can never forget a compliment? I mean, Putin says one flattering thing about Donald Trump in the press. Donald Trump decides that is enough to make Russia a great ally of the United States. That makes Putin a great leader, a strong leader, somebody who the United States of America could work with. He said this nice thing about me. I mean, look, they're already on a first-name basis. Vladimir, he calls him. Vladimir has said nice things about Donald Trump, and Donald Trump in return has said such nice things about Vladimir Putin that it's actually becoming a political liability for him.
He said if he were grading Vladimir Putin as a leader, he'd give him an A. Now, I will leave it to the psychiatrist to explain his affection for tyrants. I just wonder how anyone could be so wrong about who America's real friends are. Because it matters. If you don't know exactly who you're dealing with, men like Putin will eat your lunch.
Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has criticized Donald and Vladimir sitting in a tree. But their admiration really is mutual. I mean, look at these headlines. You know, Putin praises Trump. He's a brilliant and talented person. Putin praises bright and talented Trump. Vladimir Putin praises outstanding and talented Trump. There was some controversy over exactly how to translate Putin's remarks, but Putin took care to flatter Donald Trump publicly, exactly the way Donald Trump likes to be flattered. And that's apparently enough for Donald Trump. That's all he needs to hear. That's all he needs to know, to tell him how great Vladimir Putin is. Putin likes Trump. He must be smart, must be great. So that is the very, very unusual context here, that you have a Republican presidential nominee who's very, very susceptible to flattery. It's the most powerful thing in the world to him. If you compliment him, he will never forget it, and that's kind of all he needs to know about you. And it's one thing for the Russian government, the Chinese government, to hack into a political party to get their opposition research on a candidate for president, right? But when the Republican candidate for president is Donald Trump, and when Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are so in love with each other, then when the Russian government breaks into the Democratic Party's headquarters and gets their Oppo file on Trump, it sort of has a different cast, right? I mean, it sort of raises the prospect of Russia and Vladimir Putin rooting for Donald Trump to win the U.S. presidential election. I mean, that prospect is made even spookier by the fact that Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, has longstanding business ties to Russia and pro-Putin dictators from whom he and his firm have taken millions of dollars. I mean, in a typical year with a typical presidential candidate, you would look at the Russian government obtaining this Oppo research file, and you would think that their primary aim, you think that the biggest risk to America would be that they'd use that opposition material against that candidate if he or she was ever elected president. They'd use it against the United States of America. But when we learned about this hack at the DNC yesterday in the Washington Post, this indication that Russia is actually rooting for Trump to become president, well, that raised the provocative prospect that Russia wouldn't take that Oppo file and use it against Donald Trump. Russia would take that Oppo file and provide it to Donald Trump. They give it to him, share it, leak it. So nothing in that file could be used against him, right? Or at least that he could defend himself from everything in that file because he'd know everything that the DNC had to throw at him. And then, lo and behold, today, one day after that Washington Post story, one day after we learned that the Russian government had broken in and gotten hold of the Democratic Party's opposition research file on Donald Trump, one day later, sure enough, the Smoking Gun and Gawker obtained and then published the file. What appears to be the whole Donald Trump Oppo file from the Democratic Party's headquarters. They published it, so now it's in the public domain. Donald Trump's campaign and everybody has access to this whole 200-plus page document. It does appear to be the Democratic Party's working Oppo file of everything they've got to throw against Donald Trump, at least everything they had to throw against him up through mid-December, which is when the document is dated. So, I mean, I don't know how you say mission accomplished in Russian. Google Translate says this is how you say you're welcome in Russian.
Пожалуйста.
Can we play that one more time?
Пожалуйста.
Пожалуйста, Vladimir. You're welcome, right? I mean, thanks for publishing everything the Democratic Party has in their arsenal against Donald Trump for this election year. The DNC says tonight, quote, "We believe that today's release and the claims around it may be a part of a disinformation campaign by the Russians." The Russians leaked the Oppo file, so it's all public domain. And so now we have some opposition and interesting questions, right? Number one, what does it mean if the Russian government really is trying to help the Donald Trump presidential campaign? How are we supposed to respond to that information in this country? Number two, why was the DNC susceptible to this? I mean, the Washington Post says these Russian hackers were rummaging around in the Democratic Party servers for a full year before they noticed and kicked them out. But the biggest question here, and this may be the most crass question as well, but it's pressing. The last question I have about this is this really all the Democrats have got? Because now, for whatever reason, we've got, thanks to the Russians, we've got access to this 200-page file labeled Confidential Donald Trump Report, Democratic National Committee, December 19th, 2015. And it has an elaborate table of contents. You can go through all the different lines of argument that the DNC apparently planned to use against Trump. He's a liar who's only loyal to himself. He's divisive. He's a bad businessman. He's uninformed and reckless in terms of his policies. He's demeaning and offensive to women. He sees women primarily as sex objects. He is a rich guy who only wants to help himself and other rich people. He has a scandalous personal history, including with his ex-wives and girlfriends. And granted, it's true, going through this document, this 200-page document, it's a very unflattering portrait of Donald Trump. But it is basically just a collection of news articles. And there's no individually researched stories here. There's no original detective work here, at least as far as I can tell. It's news stories that have been reorganized and categorized and formed into thematic arguments against Donald Trump. But it's all just public data. It's all stuff you can get by Googling. Is this really all they've got? In high-level electoral politics, is this what a real opposition research treasure trove looks like? Is it damaging to the Democratic Party's planned campaign against Donald Trump that this information is now out there for everybody to see, including the Trump campaign seeing it itself? And relatedly, this document appears to be specifically from the Democratic National Committee, from the Democratic Party. It's not from the Clinton campaign. Should we expect that even if this is all the Democratic Party has, should we expect that the Clinton campaign itself has some better dirt, has more original work? And if not the Clinton campaign, should we expect that from the super PACs that are working for Hillary Clinton? Should we expect that they'd have something better? Because this stuff is... In addition to this opposition research document, there are a few other documents that were leaked online today, including donor information and policy notes from both Hillary Clinton and the DNC. But the Donald Trump opposition research packet is the surprise here, as is the very unsettling prospect that we are now living through the Russian government and Vladimir Putin playing their own role in our American presidential election. Eek.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.